Okay, guys, today we're going to go over the Renaissance just to make sure we're all clear on some of the things that we've been going over and some of the worksheets and things that you guys have been working on. We're going to start with just discussing a little bit about what the Renaissance actually was, and we are going to begin with the what. So, what was the Renaissance? And remember, the Renaissance was a rebirth of classical knowledge, art, learning, writing, and philosophy, with a main focus on the ancient writings of the Greeks and the Romans, as well as some of their architecture and some of the ways that they were going about doing things. Remember, all of this came about due to the Crusades, the other events like the bubonic plague. Also helped contribute to the beginning of the Renaissance. Where did this all begin? It starts in the Italian city states Florence, Milan, Genoa, and Venice. Remember, those were wealthy trade merchants. Those were where wealthy city states emerged. Remember, they were mainly involved in trade, and a lot of the merchant families, like the Medici family, were going to rise during this period. Remember, the Medici were the ones who were big time bankers and traders that lived in this area. And because of the wealth that also occurred from the trade routes, remember that Italy was located in the center. Remember also that Italy was right in the middle of where a lot of those trade routes came together. Sticking out into the Mediterranean, it being peninsula, provided a perfect place for a lot of new ideas and things to be exchanged that are going to encourage the Renaissance. Eventually, this would spread to Northern Europe. Of course, it starts in Southern Europe and Italy, but eventually it does spread into Northern Europe. Remember that these Italian city states during the Renaissance had a couple of different characteristics. These are the four I want you to know. It consisted of wealthy patrons like the Medici family. You had competing city states between Florence, Milan, Genoa, and those others that were in that area that competed against each other, which actually helped the Renaissance. Remember the humanist philosophy that it puts more focus on the individuals, and remember that schools had started to improve, especially with the invention of the printing press and books being more available. Of course, art played a big role in the Italian Renaissance. Just a couple of artists we're going to mention Michelangelo, remember the Sistine Chapel, the Statue of David, and the Pieta, which is where Mother Mary is holding Jesus' body after the crucifixion. But Michelangelo, one of the main Renaissance figures. Da Vinci as well, also known as the Renaissance man. We had the painting of the Mona Lisa, The Last Supper, probably two of his most famous. Of course, remember Da Vinci could do multiple things. He was known as an inventor, a scientist. I told you about how he even drew the human body and dissected bodies in order to get detailed images. Raphael, another Renaissance artist, painted the School of Athens, which you see pictured here. He used the idea of frescoes, which was wet plaster painting. It gave depth and perception to those paintings. In writing, we talked about Machiavelli. Remember, he wrote the book called The Prince. Remember, The Prince was all about how to be an effective ruler. Sometimes rulers had to do things that weren't necessarily ethical or moral. Remember, he said it's better to be feared than loved, all in The Prince. In England, we had Shakespeare. Shakespeare's also considered part of this Renaissance movement. He was an English playwright. Romeo and Juliet is probably his most famous, along with many others. Hamlet, King Lear, Julius Caesar, all of these were writings that were done by Shakespeare. Remember that Shakespeare wrote in what they call the vernacular. We talked about another couple of writers, Chaucer and Dante, who also wrote in the vernacular. And vernacular means that they wrote in the language of the times. During the Renaissance, the main philosophy was humanism. It focused on human accomplishments, put a focus on the individual. It was less on religion and more on the worldly ideas. So we call that secular. Two of probably the most famous of the humanists was Erasmus and Petrarch. They're probably the most famous of the humanist philosophers. The result of all of this means the birth of the modern world. This caused a change when these new ideas and these new ways of thinking came about during this Renaissance period. So we saw the birth of the modern world due to the Renaissance. A couple of things I want you to consider, and write these questions down and answer them once you're done viewing the video. How did these wealthy patrons contribute to the Renaissance art? And we've sort of discussed that. If you have to, you can look these up. Why would city-states competing add more artistic accomplishments? So why are these city-states competing against each other? Why would it make art sort of explode? And then number three, Renaissance writing was probably most encouraged by what characteristics? So write those three questions down, answer them. Bring me your notes when you're done. Show me that you've written down the notes to sort of go back over this and these three exit ticket questions. Okay, and we'll go over the Reformation next.